So I'm just going to run through a little quick introduction for you of our program um, and this year's assignment, so we know where we are, where we're headed. So often our reviewers are kind of almost saying Pomona, but they mean to say San Luis Obispo. We're Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, but we're the LA program, and this is actually all the students' projects in the background. It's a fourth-year undergraduate program, just to kind of wrap your head of where you are. These are our 35 students, 36 students in the class this year. Super fun. We have grown a little bit. I'm the director and I run this program. It's kind of a highly integrated design studio. So there are a bunch of us teaching in it, and we all pretty much teach in some ways together or in a cohesive manner, which makes it kind of fun and hopefully very valuable to the students because they learn from all of us together. So Joanna Grant is with us. She teaches design. Jimenez Lai also teaches with us, at least in the first quarter. We're 20 weeks studio, 2 quarters long. Ismail Soto also teaching design. Pavel Getov, I think he's here with us. He teaches design and also practice for the students. Teddy Slowick also teaching with us right there. Teddy, design and practice, both of them been teaching with us for a while. Fabio Zangoli was here for a second. He might come back. He teaches structures, and Sarah Hearn and Tina Sorio teach history theory as part of the program. The students basically also intern in offices all over the city 2 days a week. So, and then they're in studio 3 days a week. So it's a lot to ask of them. And then of course we give them a massive program, which I'll show you in a little while. Today's reviewers are in our second half. So Kutan Ayada will be joining us at some point. He's running a little late and I just told him just to jump right in from Young Ayada and UCLA. Gabriel Freese Briggs from University of New Mexico, welcome. Georgina Hulik, I always say your name wrong, Hulich, from Patterns, UCLA. Welcome, thank you for joining us. Great to see you. Emmanuel Sorno just graduated from Princeton MArch program. He's a former Cal Poly LA Metro student, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And as I said, his thesis is pretty stellar and getting a lot of attention, which is great. And maybe Stephen Slaughter will be here at some point as well. And he's at University of Cincinnati. He just gave a lecture to our students, which is really cool. So we have Merrick, Jordan, Erica, and Jillian. So it should be a fun review group, and looking forward to that. This year we did something a little bit different. We've been doing housing for the last maybe 5 years, high rises often, and then we moved to mid-rise for a while, and now we played around in low rise. And you'll see we have a very different version of low rise than the low rise competition that Christopher Hawthorne set up. But we began with that first and foremost, and we worked on it as a team, and that we still had every student had their own project, and 12 of them were entered into the competition. One of them actually won. Erica, you'll see her project today. She won honorable mention in redistribution, and you can also see how that project played out in the rest of her design. Also, Joanna with Jimenez also won, and we're kind of proud of their accomplishment. Also, they won the honorable mentions, which were all far greater than the winners. So that was also important to note. So projects in general, the way we run it here is after that low rise project, which was really a 4-plex or 8-plex low rise, like a little housing project, just to kind of wrap your head around housing in general. Once we just cleared that out, it was about 5 weeks, we went on to do an architectural project, which is what we typically do. Very much a computer modeling, computer solid program study that tries to look at inside outside spaces and spaces in between, also engaged in a site. They're abstract, and they're really to launch an architectural interest separate from and distinct from, let's say, what the program is going to be. The program is actually, well, some might say it's large. For us, it's quite small. It's about a 210,000 square foot low rise project. It's multi-income housing with a hotel component, boutique and transient. And then we also have social health services built into it, creative offices, and a retail spaces. So we really are looking at, I said, that sort of public interior, exterior, urban spaces in between. It's an urban design project as much as it's an architectural project. So 210,000 square feet, 60,000 square feet of it is public commercial program. 50,000 square feet is going to be flexible creative office space. 100,000 square feet is the housing and the hotel. 50,000 square feet of that housing hotel is effectively mid to low income affordable housing. Then there's a high income component, a transitional family housing component, and then the sort of small boutique hotel and a transient hotel. The idea is to create a very multi-income mixed use type environment. Where also 50% of the lot is also open space. So it's about creating basically a 50% porosity, and then there's underground parking, mechanical. Our site is located on Echo Park, right here in the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Echo Park Avenue. This is Echo Park Lake, which is, there's been a lot of issues surrounding the clearing out of Echo Park Lake, homeless people that were living there. So certainly our project has some sensibility and understanding about sort of the problems associated with gentrifying a neighborhood, but also we're trying to work within this larger block here to try to make this mixed use project. You'll see the kind of landscape and the local condition kind of calling for a low-rise sort of solution. We're sticking to the 4-story maximum of 45 feet high. Here at the corner of Echo Park and Sunset. There's an existing Walgreens there, sort of a fancy boutique organic food store. And some of that's sort of been replaced, but we've removed all the buildings. So any existing building in this large parking lot area, there's a couple small ones we've taken away, and we really are working on this entire lot, which has sort of a residential backside. There's a school next door, and then this is the commercial Sunset neighborhood. So again, just kind of thinking about it, we break down the kind of our understanding into an architectural concept with form and material, an urban concept with site strategy, and then there's maybe a socio-political argument that's associated with organization and programmatic concept. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Merrick. Right, and we're running about 25 minutes per student. Like total.
All right, is my screen all good? Okay. Thanks for coming to my review. My name is Merrick Palazzo, and my project is called Living Space. And so the project is kind of centralized around these 3 main spheres or spherical forms in the project that kind of act as this main social gathering spaces in the site. And I was interested in kind of nesting these spaces within the more rectilinear forms in order to create a sort of unity within the project. And I was also interested in trying to really prioritize lots of sunny spaces and differing levels of shaded spaces for outdoor use for both public and private. So that brings me to this diagram on the left here. And I have housing on the top 2 floors, and then a kind of intermixed housing program that I'll get to in a bit on the second floor. And then you have this kind of gradient of outdoor deck spaces, which kind of serve as the connection between different housing units rather than having individualized balcony spaces. You have these more shared social gathering spaces. And you have this kind of gradient of sunlight that reaches each of the spaces to accommodate different times of the year and what you would like to be using. And then on the ground floor, you have this shaded public space joined by retail areas. And so my office spaces are on along Logan Avenue, Logan Street, which is opposite of Echo Park Ave. And they are also alongside the daycare center, which is also across the street from the school on Logan Avenue, Logan Street. And this is, they're connected to the office spaces for easy pickup and drop off. And the housing is mixed with different square footages and units throughout the site. And they're stacked between the top fourth floor and third floor. And high-income housing and low-income housing are scattered to avoid any sort of segregation. And then on the ground floor level, you have retail spaces in the lavender color, and then you have cafe spaces and restaurants in the orange. And then along the Sunset Boulevard front street, you have grocery spaces that kind of are adjacent to this central main sphere, which houses the public market space. And back here in the center of the site is a outdoor amphitheater in the second sphere, and the third sphere along the Echo Park Street is a kind of fancier upscale restaurant, which butts up against the boutique hotel and transient hotel. So one of my main strategies for the site planning of my project was to create multiple paths and axes through the site, starting with these two main axes, which kind of bind the and connect these three main spheres. And so you end up with a kind of forced perspective throughout the site that you can see in this left top rendering. And then at the center of these two axes, you have this public sunny outdoor space for gathering with different sized spaces and seating areas. And moving forward, on the second floor, you have micro housing and indoor gathering spaces for the housing units on the upper floors, as well as these small gym spaces for each of the housing buildings. And then on the top floor, you have these green spaces along the decks with community garden spaces as well. And these are just some views from the rooftop decks and along Echo Park Ave, and another rooftop deck looking down kind of in towards the public market. And this is a chunk model kind of just showing and emphasizing that connection and kind of tension between the central sphere of public market space and how you can kind of look down into the space and see what's going on. And kind of also showing this relationship between the housing and the more transient living spaces, and such as the hotels and the offices, and how this is kind of sheltered from the street by those. And then finally, you have a section showing again just this relationship and nesting of this central sphere, and then the housing units and the more transient programs. And that's the end of my presentation.
Merek, could you please have the presentation in a loop so we can continue to see all the drawings? Thanks.
So I can begin with a few comments here. I think that, well, thank you for your presentation. I think it was very thorough. Drawings are pretty amazing. What I find kind of, I don't know, disoriented in a way is the fact that for some reason the plans look a lot more separated than what the actual massing of your project or your design or your building is. You know, the fact that there seem to be no kind of connections between the different buildings other than in very specific locations. It makes it a little hard to read what kind of unity you're arguing for when, you know, everything seems to be following like a small city grid of sorts, right? And it's interesting that you mentioned that, you know, a rectilinear grid with spheres being cut out, yet for some reason in these plans at the moment, you can only see one. But, you know, going back to that argument of kind of unity and how all this kind of ties together, how can the sphere or the node help you unify this kind of distinct or discrete spaces for other programs? And I feel that it is successful just with the simple kind of moment or of subtraction of the sphere, right? Like the building that is immediate to the sphere, you can tell that, you know, the sphere is doing something to it. Therefore, like they're in conversation with each other, but I don't see the rules of your grid. And I don't know if you have a logic behind it that I'm curious to see what kind of guided, you know, the fact that you have some what they at the moment look, well, the way they're shown here on the screen, that the vertical ones are sometimes wide, sometimes very narrow, and then the others seem to be kind of skewed, but not follow kind of a strict logic. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think the main reason for having this kind of skewing on the top floors was to avoid having too much overlap between different rooftop decks. But on the ground floor, it was more about allowing for easier access and movement through the site.
Right, I guess that I get the argument of movement. I think, you know, everyone kind of wants, you know, to create shortcuts and all these different vantage points, and especially as a site strategy. I don't know, I feel that it just could be a little more orchestrated, right? Like there's some moments of, like, if I can draw on the screen in a second, like it just, they seem just slightly awkward, like what is happening, what dictated that, for instance? Or like the fact that there is a moment here as well. It just seems that, you know, like that angle and that angle are different. It seems like you're thinking of something that you're not telling us. I'm not saying that it's like a bad thing. I was just curious. And kind of another point of view, I was also a little bit concerned at the beginning when you showed that initial diagram of like shaded spaces, and the idea of what is a shaded space, if not just like a, I don't know, like a parking lot with kind of, you know, no walls. So it's kind of just a dark space, not a shaded space. But the fact that you have this much elevation seems extremely nice. But then at the same time, there are opportunities to create more vertical connections that I think that you didn't take advantage of, that you could have in the higher floors, right? I don't know if this is a good view of that, but if you can move to this, maybe another.
Maybe.
Yeah, like this is great. Like, you know, you have basically 3 floors that are all the same, more or less the same. And I just wonder, like, what kind of connections and what kind of, you know, you know, double height or triple height spaces you could have created to really make those areas, like, I don't know, more well connected, you know, visually connected rather than, I guess, structurally.
Picking up on your point, Emmanuel, about the kind of tensions in plan, and Merrick, thanks for kicking off this session, having the difficult job of holding our hands through the first super dense project. You mentioned forced perspective at one point. Is that the relationship of the kind of wedges that we get in plan? Is that where some of those come from?
Yeah, some of those, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say mainly along the ground floor, but
yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think there's an interesting tension playing out between vision and movement in the sense of the accessibility of a grid and the sort of clarity and legibility of like wayfinding through a grid, and the kind of slight obfuscation of that through the forced perspective, which is creating sort of this gap or this slight dynamism between movement and vision. And I really appreciate that. The thing I'm really curious about is, one, how the kind of subtractive elements of spheres play into like a focal point within vision. Like I think those are in some ways, right, the oculus, like they look like eyes, they're the center of where our eyes go, and then how that projects out or radiates to the project. It seems a little distinct from the operations of grid and forced perspective. So I'm curious about that relationship. And then also the kind of ornamentation of forced perspective. If it sets up a massing relationship, which I think it does in a really wonderful way, actually. If we're looking at the bottom left here, the kind of black shading devices seem to be kind of distinct and seem to be an opportunity to continue that sort of warping and wefting between grid and forced perspective. And I'm curious if they're doing that, and if you could, tell me if I'm missing something there.
I don't know that I considered that really about the shading devices, but just that they were kind of like an outer shell that kind of dictated from the forms underneath them. But
got it. Well, I think it's wonderful that the structure kind of begins to play off the kink in plan. So to Emmanuel's point, like how does it carry vertically? Well, maybe less in visual connection, but certainly in the kind of structural form of those kinked structural elements. But I think it would be really wonderful to say like, well, shading can also, especially as like it plays with patterns of sun, continue that relationship of vision, perspective, and mobility a little bit more.
And I mean, Merrick, sorry, when I look at your project, I mean, something that I find really interesting, and I think rather positive at your level of education, is that to me, it has three very different readings or interpretations that have to do, one related to the plan, one related to the axon. I mean, this is kind of like being seen from above, and one that relates to the close-up perspectives. So, and I can think about three different projects that relate to each of them. So when I look at your plan, and I completely agree with Emmanuel's comments, I mean, there is on the one hand, it's very rigid, but through a kind of lack of discipline, in the sense that, I mean, it wants to follow a grid, but there is no rigor in terms of, I mean, neither the space in between each of these blocks or the actual orientation. I mean, 90-degree corners, they're good. They're not, I mean, like if you can have a 90-degree corner in a housing unit, I would take it. So, so the project that I think of is Sir John Soane's plan for the Bank of London, which is, I mean, it's kind of like the very optimistic example of what this plan could be, but I think you are very close to it, which basically, I mean, it is disciplined, even though it's still weird, because there is a very kind of unexpected relationship between the outline of this cluster of parts, and then the way that this grid that seems to be a grid, but there are moments where the grid is completely off, but then they're so subtle that I think, I know, it creates a very productive relationship between the part and the whole. So in your plan, you just see parts. And so it's difficult to think about, I mean, what is this umbrella, like, I know, both conceptual and material that, I know, could maybe kind of come up to its material and physical way when, I know, you start to look at it from a completely different projection, saying like, say, a section or axonometric. So what I see in the axon, and also another kind of optimistic, but maybe not too far away from what you have, is a Pacific Design Center by Cesar Pelli here in Los Angeles, where basically, I mean, I identify 3 or 4 different volumes. I mean, one of them being the sphere, or this, I know, circular element. The problem or the difference is that in Pelli's project, I mean, it's just the purity of these 3 monumental big objects that are, I mean, just a chunk of material. In your case, it has so much ornament. It's that then, I know, in a way, you lose the clarity of the massing diagram, because all you see are little parts that I think also suffer maybe a little bit of the lack of discipline that the plan has. And then when I look at the perspectives, I think of Masdar City by Foster and Partners in Abu Dhabi, which is basically an autonomous, 100% self-sustainable city in the middle of the desert, where it's almost like, I know, it's a very, in its most unapologetic way, it's like almost an absurd expression of technology, because there is everything, and at the same time there is nothing, because there are like all these wind towers and solar panels. So there is something very industrial in the way that you perceive the space within, and again, this is just through these perspectives that I mean, I think of a theme park, or I think about something like this highly synthetic and artificial, and like where almost like the scale of the human body, it's disappears, because there is no intimacy. Everything is big and wants to be very robust, and so I mean, in a way, I do appreciate the fact that, I mean, like this project can bring so many things to the table, and that it can be discussed at so many levels. But what I would try to do in the future is like, think maybe a little bit more holistically, where, I mean, there are consequences that take place when you have one idea that, I mean, that idea needs to carry on through more parts of the project. So I think there's just too many ideas going on here, and but still, I mean, I think it's really sophisticated the way that you draw it. I think, I mean, it's really yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to say it. I mean, it's sophisticated, and it's elegant, and I think it's highly accomplished for what the brief of the studio is.
Yes, very convincing, I think. On that note, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the organization. If you can go to that axon at the end. That one. Because here, they're kind of, it just kind of intrigues me the way that you set it up, which is super interesting. Because it's all a matter of like, what are you assigning value to, right? Like there's a question of, is the view to the street or is your connection to the street the most valuable? And if that is so, why are you giving it to the hotel? You know, it's kind of you're favoring, I guess you can say, consumerism, or people coming in and you know, that kind of transient space. And you're using that to then shield housing, you know, which is, it's a question of reading, and it's just a matter of like something that you have to be conscious of. Like, how do you read this? Is it that, you know, the hotel is shielding housing, or or does the housing even need protecting in this sense, right? Like the fact that it's inside, are you trying to make kind of an inward looking campus that is detached from the city? Therefore, your grid, you know, begins to break as it's, you know, coming in contact with the spheres. You know, there are different arguments that you can take on this. And I feel that, you know, to Georgina's point, if you can look at this a little more holistically, you can find the kind of reasoning or kind of a unifying concept for the different moves that you're making, both spatial and site, and informal as well.
Thank you.
I might jump in and just say, because we have like a minute. I think those are very astute observations. I think it was interesting to call it theme park, inward looking, industrial. For housing in LA, maybe there was an appropriateness in a certain point in history and time for that. So it's interesting to see that in your project. I'm not saying it's not correct, but then also you match that with a very almost Beaux-Arts looking plan. So there's this weird planning organization that's highly ordered, even though, as pointed out, eccentric or idiosyncratic, semi-idiosyncratic, but then you give it the theme park with the, you know, expo bubble in the middle. And then it has such an inward campus-like quality that, as Georgina says, could happen in a desert. There's something fascinating about that. I always see it as sci-fi myself, ending up on, like, you know, the new Mars project or something. And so I guess maybe what I'm kind of suggesting to you when you do your thesis, I would think a little bit about your thesis project and what program you choose to use to examine the architectural interests you have. And I'm not 100%. And maybe, yeah, it looks a lot like the Blade House or something by Morphosis, but it seems to me that there's probably a different type of industrial project that may be appropriate for you, that might really lend your capacities to really venture into places that make a lot of sense. But I actually really like that you always held your ground, that you didn't try to normalize this into some sort of domestic space that made, you know, that fit into the landscape of what makes sense for developer building. So I applaud you for that, and all the hard work and the consistency. It's a great project. And also very comprehensively put together. That's enjoyed as well. I think we'll just keep
feedback.
I think we'll go to the next one, Jordan. Thank you, Merrick, really good.
Thanks.
Probably need to unshare to let him share.
Oh yeah, thanks.
All right, hello everybody. Great to have you here, and great to be here with you. Without any further ado, let's just dive right in here. I'm calling this project Domestic Commons, kind of just alluding to the shared domestic conditions of the mixed program. You know, I really wanted to, from the beginning of the LA Metro program and dealing with LA, I've been doing a lot of research on identity, and been reading a lot of Alexander's pattern language, and kind of referencing things that they talk about in that, in terms of you know, organizing spatial relationships. And so for this project, I looked specifically at the intersection between homelessness, a person's sense of self, and the built environment, and which kind of led me to questions like, how can we use the built environment as a tool for recovery, and how can the built environment foster self-actualization? I guess my running theory is that this project isn't directly attached to homelessness, but I don't think you can separate the two, what we're doing and the current social conditions. And so that's kind of what kind of led me down this trail here. So you guys are familiar with the program. My approach was really to try to just create these almost subcultures. I want to be careful about subcultures, and I think I should follow that up by saying the subcultures that I tried to create through organization of the program on the site, they are internally focused, but they're open to free exchange within one another. So that is what I'm working towards here. So I used Boolean operations of ellipsoid voids to kind of create these shared open spaces and clear lines of sight and some distinct features between each kind of piece of the program as a means of wayfinding. Again, to kind of like ease anxiety and just create a level of comfort on the site. A big feature throughout this project is this idea of a privacy gradient. We have this shared public-private, and so I was playing with this idea of these kind of collapsible screen facades, so that obviously they can be adjusted to the user's preference, but it also provides a bit of privacy and also some visual connection to the ground below. A lot of housing, a lot of residential units in this project, and so I was looking at some different floor planning and just what the different units would look like, and trying to make a comfortable condition for all of the different income levels. And then I did this chunk of this kind of public hall, and the chunk just exposes this multi-purpose exhibition space, which is connected to restaurants, retail, and then the boutique hotel or an office space are in the upper floors there. And then just a couple of vignette perspectives here. And that's the end of it. Thank you.
Jordan, could you elaborate just a little bit more so I understand kind of the starting point for you in some ways was identity? And I'm wondering if you're thinking of that as something that various individuals cultivate or something that the building produces that people can then relate to. And there's a connection there, but.
Yeah. So if I can just try to clear that up. So what I intended on doing was using these like voids, obviously as shared spaces, but I guess the idea is that having these internally focused like social ecosystems, if you will, breeds this familiarity, and familiarity eases anxiety and kind of creates a condition of comfort for the people that use the site.
I find that interesting because, one of the realities of the past year of evictions at Echo Park Lake is that many people, even though the city ultimately subsidized quite a bit of housing for people and hotels and otherwise, didn't want to leave because the park was home, right? I mean, that there was an interest in that, perhaps related to identity. And so I think the lake, in a way, is a void that produces identity. So to pick up on that thread and to say, begin to use various geometric tools to create voids in your project, and you create kind of micro enclaves, perhaps, where different scales of collectivity can be registered, is, I think it's an interesting strategy. It's difficult, especially after Merritt kind of set us up to say, like, he was integrating and nesting everything and therefore not producing segregation, to then go to your project where you've segregated things in different ways. And yet I feel that in some ways, while that's a difficult setup, there isn't a complete hierarchy of those spaces, right? There isn't necessarily one thing that is, better than the others. And yet I'm so curious, in looking at the voids that you created, that your initial rendering, the one that's on the top of your concept board, the one that you first showed, is perhaps of the most like conventional space in your entire project, right? The one that is sort of most developer amenable, perhaps. So I really appreciate this setup, but that is also all to say, I think that the banality, even when you show the spherical voids, of the kind of lack of like material or sort of markers of a tangible kind of identity, it's difficult to understand how you produce those. So while I appreciate that in concept, I think the execution stops just short of being able to say, what is it that makes a void collective? What is it that makes architecture, produce an identity that people can latch onto?
Wow, that's really interesting. And it's funny that I kind of read it in a way kind of opposite, the fact that, I don't know, for me, a Boolean is a very violent act, if anything. And it's kind of odd then to say that it's kind of a soothing space, or like kind of comfort. And it's, I don't know, to me, it seems a little contradictory. Not problematic. I think that if that is your stance, I think that is something that you can definitely argue for, and definitely say, maybe, you needed to put a little more love into those final views, showing that those Boolean operations can give you, the kind of effect that you wanted to get. At the moment, because they're blank, it's like they're ready to be filled in, and we don't know what to fill it in with. You have to kind of tell us. In terms of, the organization is interesting as well. The fact that, when I look at your axon, it almost seems like you have a park. You've kind of created a park and elevated it at the top, and you're actually having a conversation of how does a park, in a way becomes kind of a housing typology as it extends into the city grid, right? Like, because it's a really odd thing again, right? Like, if you can go to your axon, I think it was towards the end, right here, right? Like that whole top area, even though I don't know, you didn't explain it to be a park, it almost seems like it could be, right? Like there is a surface at the top of your building that is ready to be used, as a park. And then that eventually transitions onto a very kind of almost banal housing, which is, again, another super interesting move. Very, I don't know how much I don't know. I guess that it seems yet again contradictory, and again, it's not a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, you know, you need to kind of own it and say, like, yeah, this is what I'm going for. You know, formally, I am looking at these kind of moments where typologies meet in a very odd way, because that's kind of where, you know, society is set up. That's how the kind of urban environment that you're so interested in looking, or even the identity, that's the way, you know, things are in our own society. So I feel that there is an argument there. It's just a matter of, like, you know, realizing what these moves are giving you, more than, you know, just kind of the formal obvious moves.
Hey, Jordan, it's nice to see you.
Hey, Georgina. Yeah, you too.
He had to suffer the torture of working with us for a long time. Was it 2
It
quarters?
was a pleasure.
Okay. So, I mean, maybe following up on, I mean, on the relevance of the park and how this building may start to build an identity through that. One of the things that I mean, like, to me, are one of the strongest aspects of your project, and I think it has to do with maybe not necessarily with identity, however, maybe related to this idea of open space and being in a place where, you know, interior and exterior, I mean, are not necessarily as defined as in other, you know, housing projects around the city, when, I mean, there's just a chunk of a building in a corner and, you know, little balconies, and that's it. When you showed the detail sections and talked about the screen and these collapsible, I think you mentioned collapsible screens, the first thing that came to my mind is like, oh wow, I mean, these are, I mean, these units or these components of the project have these very fuzzy edges that, I mean, that start to be pretty thick, and they created kind of a very kind of fluid relationship between interior and exterior, where, I mean, you're not necessarily in the park, but then, I know, it's like you really try to bring the context into your project. So then I see the plan and the edges, I mean, the line that or the outline of each of these blocks of housing is, it's a hairline. So it's like, where is that fuzziness? Where is that space that, I mean, maybe it's undetermined, and that I think, I know, it's just so needed and such a good idea for housing units. I mean, I know for housing projects, there is a need of efficiency. There is a need of using every single square foot. There are, but I mean, on the other hand, there are so many incentives from the city, like to try to, I don't know, to have open space. But then, of course, for developers, it's not, I mean, the most viable way to do it. But you don't have a developer here, so you should really take advantage of that. And I think that's also a mechanism that might help you articulate the interstitial space between all these blocks much better. Because again, you don't want just, I know, like a tall wall that separates, I know, or like a facade that separates so radically what the interior and exterior spaces are. So I think there is also something related to the scale of these that I think it has to be somewhat, maybe a little bit, I mean, not necessarily institutional, but something that actually it's, I know, it's related to the scale of the city. So it's not just, I mean, it's not these housing projects that are thrown onto the ground and you see the same scale of doors that you see on the ground floor are the same that you see on all the other stratas. But then there's also, I mean, I think it lacks the intimacy of the, I don't know, kind of like a more domestic scale. But I think it's beautifully drawn. I think you have done, I mean, it's just so accomplished in terms of the control that you've had on not representation of the project just for the sake of presenting it, but I think you have used it, the rigor that you had to design it and to draw it, I think was carry on all the way to the way that you are presenting it. So yeah, that's really good.
Thank you all for that.
Maybe just to tack on to what Georgina's saying about the fuzzy boundary. I mean, I think unless we have to move on, Stephen, you can just stop me. Okay, I totally agree with you know, the kind of that at the larger site, and just looking more closely at your plans in the concept board, there's these moments where the kind of housing block, yeah, that'd be great to look at a plan. Maybe it's the sort of the building on the top right that the units are all blocks within this curving form, and the way that the kind of poche of the shading creates alternating depths. I think it's actually really sophisticated to use this kind of two geometries, one, you know, in a way that produces a kind of affordability of housing units within a cheaper curving shell, is really interesting. And when I zoom in it works really well at this meso scale. When I zoom in all the way, there are these moments where there seems to be like an opaque wall that sort of wraps the corner rather than a screening shell. So I think there's like a little bit of details of like going in and post-processing all of the kind of material selections and really using that poche to produce the kind of screens of privacy, as you called them, or also just kind of a depth and a registration between sort of a conventional building block and a curving form, which can be really, really fascinating. And as just a simple sort of keeping some of your abstraction representation going. And I agree with Georgina that there's a deliberateness to sort of some of the moments where you withhold details, but to produce a kind of abstract rendering of sort of how we really register that depth on the facade, that I think would be such a fantastic, interesting drawing to say, take the curving and the depth of the poche and to flatten it so that we can understand what that produces as a kind of effect.
Yeah, no, that's something really interesting to think about for sure.
I think you got a very interesting review. Jordan, it's so wonderful having you in this class, I have to say. The way you ask questions, your inquisitive mind, the way you speak up, I've really appreciated that the entire time. Just want to put that out there. There's an interesting conflict in this project that I think everyone's kind of identifying between those two different renders, right? The normativity of this rectilinear world that works for a developer and the could be potential of something quite interesting that's happening in the market space or in that open space, right? With the Boolean kind of argument. And probably the most interesting are when they try to struggle with each other, which I think Gabriel was just pointing out. And that's probably when it got exciting. So there's something about the two being separated and then trying to come together and work on those kind of geometries, I think were fruitful for you. Could have been more fruitful. You know, life of course been different, but and so you can kind of see it in the overall site plan. There's there's almost this segregation of the different thoughts, the rectilinear housing, the cool market space, and then this object in between. And probably my preference is to work on that object in between as much as the housing also starts to transform, but all of them, I mean, they're just very interesting things. The ground plane kind of got neglected. But the idea of the void as place of identity, I think Gabriel also brought that up, was an interesting one that really, I think it's something to kind of think about, keep working on as you kind of move forward and take this elsewhere in your life. So there's those original thoughts that you put forward are really valuable. The way they're being demonstrated in this building project, maybe they're a little short yet of what they can be. But those are probably the things that maybe can help you work your way through it. So I definitely applaud you for the hard work and effort and continuation through a long COVID year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, you guys.
Yeah, thank
Really
you, Jordan.
appreciate all your feedback.
Let's jump to Erica.
Hi, thank you all for coming today, and I will share my screen right now. My project is called A Collection of Follies, and the Follies began as they came from the Low Rise project that I initially did. And they've evolved into this pushback against this larger housing project, wanting to be a homogeneous insertion into such a diverse context of Echo Park. And they, this collection of buildings presents a cast of unique characters that interact in a way that creates somewhat uncomfortable in between spaces that aren't necessarily expected. So organizationally, this project features a central public plaza with a variably permeable perimeter of program. And the Follies are placed throughout the plaza, throughout the open space, acting as a village that's open to the occupants of the project or whoever's the public within the project in the plaza. And they remain somewhat protected from the surroundings at the same time. And additionally, the space between these characters creates a unique urban condition, a mingling of Echo Park and the diverse family of programs within the project itself. So this view is of one of the Follies, a few of the Follies and different forms interacting with each other. Let me go back. I'm sorry. This is the overall view of the project, and it has a gradient of density that moves back towards the back of the site, which is a more private residential area back here, away from Sunset Boulevard. And the view that I showed initially is the view from Sunset Boulevard you'd see as you're approaching the center of the project. So it's relatively open and the Follies are front and center. Moving to the program organization, the Transient Hotel and Boutique Hotel are located on the front two corners of the site. And from there, the remaining residential buildings are stacked on top of this creative office space that forms an elevated semi-public, semi-private plaza that creates a bit of a sense of separation between the lower, very public area of the project. And then these are the ground floor plans. So the one on the left, plan number 1, highlights that organization of the Follies and the in-between space that they create, as well as this increasing density as you go back. So this entire bottom floor is essentially creative office space mixed with a public market grocery situation and the maker's space, all located underneath this larger plaza area. And the second floor is also somewhat the ground floor, and that continues these creative offices as well as transitioning into the transitional family housing lobby and social services for that area. This last plan is an example is a typical housing floor plan where we start getting into the units. And for each of the blocks, there's a perimeter of units with a kind of centralized space that has access to a communal outdoor space at each of the levels. And then this is a section view from Logan Street to Echo Park Avenue, and we see the micro housing block here, and then we move left to right through this daycare center and the amphitheater area. And this is Montana Street and Sunset Boulevard, which is cutting through more of the residential parts of the project, as well as going from the upper plaza to the lower plaza. I think these elevations really highlight the idea of the collection of very different characters into one project. I think they present themselves as a jumble of vaguely related objects, but the interactions between them create a very unique urban condition for the mingling of the various populations of Echo Park and the various occupants of the building. This is the approach from Sunset and Logan, what you would see driving up. And that is the boutique hotel in the front corner. Yeah. I can go to any slide or the concept board, whichever is preferable.
Maybe go to the overall concept board.
So I guess I'll start by just asking about kind of your idea or your concept of follies, right? Like, do you, or are we supposed to read kind of the agglomeration of the buildings as you showed it in the elevations as follies as well? Or is it just, you know, the actual follies?
The follies occur at different scales. So yes, the larger buildings that are read in the elevation are another scale of folly. So they're not specifically the pavilion-sized objects that you typically think of that are the classic folly. They've grown into their like own characters at a different scale.
Right, and I think that that in itself, I mean, it's obvious, but you didn't mention it, you know, and I think that that in itself is a kind of interesting and kind of strong proposition of how do you scale this up, and eventually how do you put program into them? Because, you know, they are competing otherwise, right? The fact that your follies are, like the actual follies are only in the center, in the front, on Sunset Street, and they're visible, they're competing, or let's say your buildings are competing with them, right? Like there's kind of, everything is kind of different. All of the pieces have their own kind of unique and diverse kind of identities or kind of formal qualities to them. Some make sense, some don't. Like it doesn't really matter because you're creating those rules for yourself, right? Like everything goes, and this is kind of a theme park of discovery. So I kind of wanted those little things to be inside the building as well. Organize your space, put them up in terraces, you know, like create kind of, it looks like a theme park. It should feel like one. There should be, I don't know, a really interesting circulation system that probably just doesn't make sense, but it's all about that discovery of like, where do I find my location in this space with the one place where I want to go have lunch or whatever. I feel that you have the skill, you have the space, the kind of formal qualities in the space making qualities to create that diversity, right? Like you have it there. Just a matter of kind of like, if you're going for a collection of follies, just put more in there, you know, like really make it an experience. And I don't know, then you made the decision to render white. And I am curious about why, again.
For
Like that
my,
one, the last render,
the
right?
last
Like,
one, yeah.
yes. I think there was another one in between as well, but like the last one is
Yeah.
shocking.
I assumed they
because-
weren't finished. I just assumed they weren't
That's
finished.
it, yeah.
I don't think that's what her intention was.
I did not
It's-
intend them to look like this. For my mid review, I had them patterned, and then I was having this kind of internal struggle between the meaningless of the pattern,
Right.
and then I tried to articulate that via facade, which doesn't explain the whiteness of the buildings because they still shouldn't be white. But
Right, but I guess that what I'm
Yeah.
getting at is the fact that your pattern and your surface treatment of this, I guess of your forms, is a unifying thing, right? Like it makes everything cohere. You have like hints of very classical architecture with very like advanced digital work, and it's when it's white, it's obvious that, you know, these things are different. When you have your patterns and your colors, all of that blends. So I don't know, I don't dislike it. I think that if anything, it makes it more obvious. If you think of Shumi's Parc de la Villette, which is probably the biggest, you know, project on Follies, it's like he uses red for all of them, so you can tell where they are. Right, like it's I don't know if it's a matter of perhaps then being a little more selective with your texturing and with your kind of surface mapping of these forms, to really kind of highlight what are the moments where you want people to focus on, right? Like you have that ability to kind of play with this, or maybe, I don't know, but you talked about kind of going against homogeneity, and at the same time, if you apply the same pattern to everything, it becomes homogeneous. So just, you know, things to think about, but, you know, great work.
thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting thread, because the idea that they would all be sort of materially distinct in order to make them distinct also might kind of erode where you find distinction. So, right, like if everything, maybe not white, but if everything looks similar or is treated in this kind of digital ephemeral quality, the difference is found elsewhere than material, which I think is actually very compelling and sort of forces you to find difference in different ways. And in the sense that you've sort of scaled up follies in a way and worked them together in order to create this complex, I think what you've done is taken the sort of objecthood of a folly and made it spatial. Like you've made folly spaces. And I don't know completely how to think through the effects, positive or negative, of all those things yet. But I think one of the, it's super interesting, the kind of idiosyncratic voids and spaces that carry through the project. And they're really resolved in the sense of creating a kind of fluidity. But when I look at the plans, I'm like, oh, this is such a massive building. You know, it kind of reminds me of like 80s mall design in the sense of like, in that world, it was creating, you know, marketing difference, but here it's difference, you know, presumably for a kind of collective population that's living there and visiting. But when I look at the plans, I'm also like, well, there actually aren't that many units. There aren't that many housing units. And it's not to say that, you know, you didn't follow through on the brief. I'm totally sure you did, but I wonder if there's a way in which units and housing and the kind of demands of the project in that way could work themselves a little bit deeper into the plans to really be kind of evident and be sort of made more, be pushed through, and whether that would allow you to resolve it in a different way. So right now, I think that the spaces, the fluidity, the kind of, again, perhaps sometimes useless spaces are kind of wonderful, but is there a way that you could actually push them to kind of maximize what you're doing in terms of impact for the programmatic ends of the brief?
Hi, Erica. I find the project just incredibly interesting. You know, maybe the kind of things that's getting attention, and I completely agree with, are handled for me differently in plan than they're handled, let's say, in the appearance of the project. And I think that's a conflict that needs closer attention and maybe further study to kind of figure out where the project wants to push. Because one could argue in the plan the way the different instances begin to cross-pollinate, and while they kind of maintain a distinct figuration within traits of their geometry, right? As they're registered within plan begins to operate across the entire territory. You look at this project, okay, like everybody's getting along. Everybody in plan in some way behaving in a range of possibilities of how we use the geometry and demarcate edges, entrances. And all of which, by the way, is quite amazing. Just the use of tangency, offsetting, dealing with the edges, how you deal with centrality of the circle and how you begin to break that. It's quite exquisite, I would say. I think the last rendering for me is where the project needs, kind of its next stand, right? Like that's the one where you have to kind of really push on thing. Okay, like, can I get to the kind of resolution and quality and intentionality that I'm able to drive within plan in the way the project begins to appear to us? And if I look at these three buildings, I think this corner one, which you call the boutique hotel, like clearly operates on a different kind of, let's say formal strategy, aesthetic ambiguity, and maybe even time compared to the objects in the background, which seem to be referring to, a kind of more idealized versions of former architectures, at least in this view. I don't want to make judgments about what we cannot see, but we can see. And I think like each one of these images are kind of their objects onto their own. And they can be treated in how they appear to us. Like to me, the corner object is kind of quite amazing. Just as a building, it's dealing with kind of gables and skylights and aperture in all kinds of different ways. And on its own, I think it's spectacular. I wonder if the clear distinction between these follies, and maybe some of the earlier comments are pointing in that direction as well, that there could be cross-pollination between some of these objects vis-a-vis perhaps materiality, perhaps some formal traits that begin to jump over, so that we don't begin to evaluate them purely as their, like in their standing as objects as they refer to ideal forms of architecture of other times. And I think that that's kind of what's going on. Like there's the modern building on the right, there is kind of the postmodern building on the left, and maybe there is the more, let's say, current version in the corner. And because if it stands that way, I think my fear is that they will always be judged against one another, and not let's say, like ambiguously standing next to one another. So like that would be kind of like my only critique, because I think as an urban strategy is super interesting. Kind of really activating the middle, breaking it down, super interesting. It's city within a city, it's beautifully drawn. I'm all for it. And I think this is like, you know, the trouble in a project like this is, like, I think Parc La Villette was a great example. Like there, Shumi is trying to figure out how do I design the cube in, you know, like 20 different ways. Color is the same, but like how do I erode the corner? What do I add? What do I kind of add? How do I tweak it in some way? Like in your case, like you have to play 20 different architects. And that is a hard ask, right? Like if the ambition becomes difference, then it kind of pries you open. Your sensibilities need to go into all kinds of orbits. But if it becomes about, okay, now that they're different, how do I begin to bridge them that operates through my sensibility? I think their difference could be productive, and you don't have to kind of get almost schizophrenic in terms of just trying to differ them from one another. It would be more like bridging them together in some way, materially, like in terms of their maybe smaller scale articulation. But I'm trying to think back. This is second year studio, right? Am I correct? I think I designed
This is fourth year undergrad.
Sorry, fourth year. I'm trying to think what I did fourth year undergrad. Nothing at this level of like complexity and kind of inquiry. So I think a lot to chew on. Super interesting, Erica. It's keep the work up. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes if someone wanted to add anything.
Maybe only just to fill the time. I mean, I think in some ways, Erica, I have less to say because it is just really overwhelmingly fantastic. It's really quite an achievement. I'm in looking at the drawings and I'm looking at your sections, and there's so much in there, and we could celebrate that and go on that. But I also just want to point out, like, I really deeply wish that the ground had the same intensity as the kind of volumes above the ground. That the white line is just like not probably in some ways accurate to what you've done even, but it's also not doing justice to the kind of expansion and compression of the spaces that happen in the way that the street carries through to the project and begins to kind of cascade and unfold. So if there's one point where I would say insert some love, it would really be to capture and sculpt in the same way as you have above the ground in that drawing.
And I make just a very quick comment, given that I think everything has pretty much been said. I really like the project, and what I think it was pretty smart of you is the kind of the implied level of abstraction that the project shows, which is, I mean, the ambiguity that is presented by plans and elevations on the one hand, but then, I mean, plans that are technical, yet they're so, beautifully expressive and intricate that also, I mean, maybe it's not a building. It's not just a building. Maybe, I mean, it can be just a beautiful drawing of of a flower, or I mean, or some element in nature. And with elevations and the sections, also the color palette that you have chosen, I mean, has nothing to do with materiality, I believe, or materials, not materiality. And so, I mean, it presents itself with this level of abstraction that that still lies somewhere in between, building and drawing, or building an image. And then even the renderings, then you have chosen to render the project in purely white. So, I mean, even though we start to see material thickness and there is, there is a very clear idea of the weight and gravitation of the project, still from the moment that it's all white, I mean, it's still kind of vague how, what the physicality of the project is, I think in a very productive way. So yeah, it's really beautiful.
I'm going to tap in here a little bit. Can you flip your concept board a little over to your two renders of your low rise? There you go. Just zoom in a little bit on those for people. And some, I think the critics are fantastic. They really understood what's happening, and the project is a beautiful project in terms of urban design. I think it's very strong, and I think the intentions were always very strong. I think Emmanuel's point is a good one. How do you avoid? How does diversity not become homogenous when you make it so similarly diverse? It's an interesting argument to put out there, and I don't think you had that before. But I think you had something so much easier before, because you really had Frank Gehry's forms that you just could hack up and rechange and redistribute. So it gave you an initial vocabulary that you could analyze in a very intelligent manner. But the whole patterning system was your own. The striping, the coloring, the way in which you started to elaborate, a lot of playfulness that I think you got maybe a little nervous about. I don't remember being part of that conversation. And you kind of smoothed them out into sort of the new, I don't know, there's like these new Teslas out there that have this kind of iridescent color that's out there, that's happening. And I would say it's something you're very familiar and comfortable, and it's absolutely exquisite on the elevations, but it seems like it, I feel like it was hiding something you never wanted to show. Maybe was that render that everyone's falling on and saying, oh, we don't like it, but we love it. Because there you finally designed a building, that corner building is your building. That's nothing, that's not Gehry, that's not, and the classical weird things next to it, I'm not sure what those are. They just were sort of like, I don't know. As Kutan pointed out, you have 100 buildings you're trying to design. It's next to impossible to do that. So you set yourself up some extreme ambition, and then you smoothed it out with color, which is your talent. You're extremely graphically inclined. The ground plane not quite worked. So the AXA is my favorite. It's like Charles Moore, but better. And it's, yes, the theme park, but it's so much better. And I think in some ways, maybe I don't like the way the tall buildings on the backside become so tall and become so indifferent to the residential neighborhoods. That could be some work on. But I just want, you obviously know, there's such talent and skill and ambition and playfulness that I would never want you to deter yourself from or not keep working on, because it's so powerful. And it's really a great project.
I have a really
Joanna,
quick comment. We were bringing up Shumi earlier and his use of red, and I would encourage you to really keep going with these interests in color and gradients. And I think what's so fascinating about Shumi is for him, he constructed buildings, and they ended up having to specify a color materiality, but for him, I think red was indexical. It was not material. So I would continue for you to be thinking of your projects in this representational way. And even though eventually you will build things and they will become material, but I think the representational project is the thing which manifests itself in a variety of different ways.
Great. Thank you all for your comments. It was really interesting, and I'm excited to think more about this.
So thesis will be fun for you. Yeah, let's move to Jillian.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for giving us your time. My name is Jillian Haas, and I'll be presenting my low-rise project. So to kind of start off with my site strategy, I really wanted to create a certain amount of permeability into the site. And I was kind of looking at opening up the corners and analyzing where there might be more of a faster flow of people entering the site and exiting. Kind of my main strategy of circulation was through this diagonal, these long diagonal members, and circulating outdoor alongside of those. So kind of the social ideas behind the design is an attempt to kind of bring more public space into the site and give a new hierarchy to public space. One of the ways, I kind of had 3 strategies for looking at this. One of them was through vertical obstruction. So I was kind of looking at these orbs and how those can start and carve into the site, kind of breaking up some of the more private spaces while also allowing there to be circulation through. Another area I was looking at was activating the voids, so the kind of spaces in between pochés, trying to give those new life, bring outdoor qualities, landscaping to that, kind of creating spaces that can meld this complex programming together. And then the third strategy was to kind of create this activated roofscape, which I brought from my first project. I wanted this roofscape to be completely owned by the public and something that pushes people to explore the site. And so I wanted to create kind of a playful approach to the roofscape by having these kind of circulatory walkways that bring people up and sit at the corners to kind of invite people in. For my programming, it can be kind of simplified down to a more commercial ground plane. And then I kind of went into more of the office space, leaving it fairly open on the 2nd floor. And then the 3rd and 4th floor is where there is primarily the residential units. I tried to kind of mix these units together to kind of create that interaction between different lifestyles, and then kind of a return back to that public scape on the roof. I really wanted there to be a direct connection between the ground floor and the roofscape. And then getting into some of the sectional qualities, I really wanted to explore the way that these bars start to divide up and the kind of layering of the program within these bars, kind of in contrast with the larger open spaces, such as the art gallery, which is on the top render or the top section, and then kind of playing into the solid void language, starting to activate the void space, giving it more outdoor life and landscaping. So this is kind of a zoom in to show the layering of residential office and more of a public ground, and then kind of the attempt to bring in more life, sunlight, and landscaping into those void spaces. And then I was also looking at like a vertical glass orb that can start and carve through some of the public planes to kind of bring in the idea of public domain into those areas. And then for my chunk, I chose to detail the corner that is the most active corner. It's where the majority of people would enter into the site, and it's kind of the main circulation to the roof. And so kind of how that interaction is more separate from the building, and it's kind of its own circulation outdoors, just kind of trying to directly connect the ground to the roof. And then in my elevations, I was looking at a change in materials to show that kind of edge condition. Because these members get kind of abruptly chopped off at the edge, I wanted to highlight that and give that a different material and kind of show that language a little bit. And then this is my last slide. It's just shows the view facing Echo Park Ave to kind of show some of the open spaces, and some of the spaces I was trying to bring in like a little bit more life and outdoor experiences. And so, yeah, I can also share my concept board, or I can go through the slides, either one.
Can you show the sections maybe?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's beautiful work. I applaud you for that. I guess, you know, from seeing the initial renderings that you had shown in the plans, like it seemed like a very plan-driven project, and it really comes alive in section as well, which I kind of I find it, you know, pretty fascinating. I think that especially you were able to work on, you know, kind of both directions. I don't think the spheres helping you, or the spheres is something that, you know, kind of, it seems like an added typology that you really didn't need, because there are kind of two things that are happening, right? Like you've decided to create a series of lines, diagonal lines or so, that organize your space on site. So you're creating a few connections, you know, from corners to another corner, or from place on site to somewhere else. It's a kind of smart way to add more daylight and windows and kind of organize space. So I completely get it. So it has this kind of, if anything, kind of an airport quality with an airplane aesthetic, right? Like that you're putting in. And then you have this scallop shape, like kind of extruded, just kind of very, I don't know, kind of floral, almost scallop shaped, that is just extruded, you know, vertically. And all those are kind of just circulation spaces to kind of move people, you know, from the bottom of the site to the top of the building. In a way, I feel that those two things were enough. Adding this kind of like long kind of this spherical thing, especially like the glass at the top. I don't know how much that's actually necessary. Like I wonder if a simple kind of cut, like whether you just leave it open, that would have, you know, kind of resolved that. I feel that if there was a place to do more of that kind of formal work, it would have been there. Or what happens if you bring also those scallop shapes into those moments to cut your building, right? Like instead of adding more, you're thinking of like, these are my rules, these two elements, these two kind of formal qualities that I'm just constantly kind of rigorously pursuing until I figure out what the composition is. That being said, you know, I really like, you know, the articulation of your circulation spaces that attach, you know, to the main kind of datums. They feel a little reactionary, or like, you know, like, oh, there's this issue. How do I bring people up? So let me just put a stair on the outside. Maybe it was just a matter of making it, you know, more about those things as well. Like, how do you give it a little more hierarchy, right? So that, you know, kind of formally and compositionally, you have a play of two elements, and you exhaust that, you know, without trying to add more. But yeah, no, I really applaud the fact that, you know, your project makes a lot of sense, both in plan and section, is very well detailed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Emmanuel, and I think Gillian, the drawings are absolutely stunning. I think the precision and the rigor and the discipline that the drawings have, it's pretty extraordinary, and I think the way that you have composed the or the composition that each of these drawings present is actually so well executed. I mean, in terms of the choreography, I mean, even though I know we can talk about one same vocabulary from which that this project is utilizing. I think the diverse morphologies of the different elements are, I mean, in some cases could be pretty tricky, like to try to still have a pretty cohesive whole when you are still dealing with so many diverse parts. And but then I guess like, to me, this is a type of projects where the drawings, I think, they are discrete, they're completely independent, like, to me, from any kind of physical or material reality. So I prefer looking at this work more at the level of, I mean, conforming or producing images rather than something, and actually theorizing about them, rather than something that can exist into, I mean, in a one-to-one relationship with an urban environment. So one of the things, I mean, one project that came to mind especially when I saw the section, then maybe that level of monumentality that of this project, it doesn't necessarily reflect into the renderings, is the Marthal project in Rotterdam by MBRDV, which is, I know, it's just a big art. It's a housing project, and then there is a market, an open market, and the underbelly, I mean, within many different things, the underbelly of the project is almost, I mean, it's like it tells almost the entire story. And then, I mean, kind of the monumental and monolithic presence of this object. I mean, talks about the project of autonomy that, I mean, it's not the case here, but there is just one. And then, I mean, there is the context of the city. So I'm wondering if the excess of, I know, stuff that you have here is actually necessary. So I mean, when I see this excess, then that's when I prefer keeping the project within the image reality. Then if I can subtract one of these parts and then try to make or try to transition that into a material physical reality, then that's when I think about the MBRDV project, and that's when I wish that material thickness in the drawings, or I know, just, let's not call it material thickness, but the way that, I know, like parallel lines would be thicker, or the thickness of the drawing or the parts of the drawings will be thicker, because then, I mean, it brings an actual physicality and a robustness to the project that right now, I mean, is so thin and fragile, that then that's when I start to suspect a little bit. So, I mean, what I find really fascinating is, I mean, like, also these two readings of the project, and then, I mean, I think something that you can take with you, and beyond, and again, the discipline and the incredible rigor that you have applied here, is the, I mean, how you can then exhaust the possibilities of the project of image making, and then, or exhaust or amplify the material conditions that, I know, might bring this into, I know, a possible physicality.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
I also just I want to applaud the kind of organization of complexity and of spectacle. And I love this, is it like airplane or airport, in that it's both spectacle and producing spectacle in its arrangements. And I'm glad we stopped at these sections, and I think that was an interesting moment, because we see that in a weird way that these kind of ellipsoids, or the eggs in the center of the building, that place, which is kind of like the thing that most directly organizes, right, the other forms, that forms a kind of nexus, is so empty, so eerily empty. And so in a weird way, I mean, I think it's like a biosphere without the bio or something, that there's a way in which there's either a kind of like critique of spectacle by emptying the mountain away, or there's an opportunity to really think about how those could be inhabited. If those are kind of the moment of density and compression in the space, how they could be sort of entered and exited. You know, on the bottom right, there's a kind of a spiral stair, which comes in out, but really to connect vertically the levels in ways which are not necessarily like void and not necessarily sort of uniform as a spiral stair would be so fantastic. And I think some of the plan making you've done is really rich and organizationally fantastic, but both in the voids and also in the way that the roof is kind of a flat truncated plane. I wish that those levels began to move away from the tools you have, which I think, you know, maybe you have one too many tools, but they've been really well deployed. But to those tools and to really think how the kind of like cascade of forms could be experienced a little bit more layered and not sort of cut at certain levels in the same way. So even though you have many different levels and terraces and all these things happening, ultimately the project has like a kind of like flatness to it, which is surprising given the sort of, you know, ellipsoids and curvilinearity. So I think that's a really wonderful way to continue to push the section, and the way that you have the forms and the voids to be to be a little bit more choose your own adventure and a little less sort of rigid as a kind of series of staircases and sort of apparatuses or spatial devices that we're sort of more familiar with. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's interesting. I caught the end of Jordan's project, then Erica and Jillian's now. What's kind of interesting, just to kind of build a thread of urbanity around these projects, there have been three very distinct approaches, you know, how one begins to deal with a block, right? I think Jordan's project, kind of extending the streets into the block, or at least the connection of street network into the blocks, and beginning to perhaps also internalizing, you know, what might be understood as building plazas as they multiply, then held within a block. And I think Erica's project kind of turns the relationship of, let's say, building and plaza completely into an inverted relationship where the perimeter is held, but plaza is internalized. And in your case, Jillian, it's interesting. You're producing multiple plazas, which no longer act as plazas, but more like landscapes in some way. And I think that's fascinating. Like all three projects are really taking on typical, let's say, organizations of how we build within urban blocks and really turning it upside down. Each of those, of course, produce potentials and problems to be kind of interrogated and taken further. And I think it seems to me, kind of in your case, like the internal corner of these plazas becomes absolutely hot points of interrogation. Like in some way, maybe they're more visible within plans, if you can go there. Somehow, how you cut through that cross, how you access those inner corners of your plazas, because now that you define these moments of outdoor spaces, and everything points to that corner. So those corners either can become, people kind of eddy around and go out, or they begin to traverse the project and really break the bar. So like my sense, they need to become probably far more charged on the ground level in the way one accesses this project. I think the plans sections are great. but the plans, like the way they're drawn, I think speak to a completely different aesthetic to me. Like if the object is imaged from above suggests more of a singular aesthetic in terms of what the building is. I think the fragmentation within the plan and maybe potential further interrogation of those as means of materialization on the larger volume that's being constituted in the aerial image could be the next step of the project. I think that the kind of maybe the singularity that is being suggested aerially in terms of what these things are could really be broken down. And I think maybe that's a little bit of a similar kind of comment compared to Erica's as well that I was trying to make. But kind of what is being suggested by the initial diagram doesn't need to manifest equally within material means. And I think you can begin to kind of agitate the purity of any diagram by layers of a project. I mean, I tend to think a singular kind of attitude towards any architecture project is just not sufficient enough. You know, I think multiple layers of attitudes towards different things as we accumulate them towards a whole, whether that whole still remains wholesome or kind of, you know, like accumulative in its qualities. I think it's that kind of thing is what constitutes an architectural experience in any building. We don't understand things with one large grand idea, but set of ideas. And I think to me, the sections and plans speak to that level of quality quite exquisitely. I think the appearance of the project is yet to kind of get to that level of inquiry, but you know, like really beautifully drawn project, Julian.
Thank you. Thanks for all that. That was very insightful.
We should probably tie up if we have last words. I mean, first, I guess I'll say it to Jillian specifically. I think it's extremely weird and creative and wonderful, your design. And I just applaud you for that and hope you continue with that kind of journey. I do think urbanistically it's very powerful. I think many of the critics pointed that out. It is an inverse relationship that creates these incredible little pockets of super fun activity on the exterior edge conditions, as opposed to what we typically find in perimeter block housing. So I applaud you for that. I wonder if you ever got to spend time with Fabio and enough time with Pavel maybe too. Only just saying when the comments made about the beautiful but cartoon still character of the sections. I don't think they needed to be that way, and I think you had access, I think, to develop them. And I think they're so visually right. They're just not articulated as such. That's just a personal opinion. And I think that comment about thinness could have been managed. Because I think what we do in this class as a whole is we tend to push the limit of the conversations. Certainly not in the way that SciArc does to that level, but certainly to some level. And the goal is to come back at that and prove it's buildable. Because I think actually, like when I look at your acts, I'll go, wow, if that thing really got built, we'd all go there and be mesmerized by this thing. It's a lot to figure out. The ground plane's still not quite there, but we would go, this is probably the most creative building I've seen in a long time. And, you know, Manuel's point, also a very good one to the little eggs inside the dome. I don't know, could have been taken out. Anyway. So creative, so wonderful, thoughtful, interesting, and I find very unique. So I'd love to see it here, and I'm happy that you worked on it. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Thank you guys for all your feedback. That was really helpful and gives me a lot to think about. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. It's our 5th review, I guess. There's this, yeah, we have 9 of these to do. any last words, feel free to throw them in there. And I just want to, of course, thank all the critics and our wonderful faculty and our incredible students for Lucky.
Thanks again
for
for the
sharing your
feedback.
work. Oh, sorry, Merrick, go ahead.
I was just saying thanks again for the feedback. It was great.
Just really, really fantastic and dense work. And I think, again, as a kind of, probably don't have the time to go there, but as a kind of thread of thinking about in betweenness and urbanism and just a consistent conversation of void and form, it was really fantastic. And we sort of dodged many of the sort of areas of conventional discussion around typologies because we were sort of thrown into these like wonderful universes, and you know the word theme park came up so many times because it's they're so rich with just sort of joy. Thank you.
If I may add a small note, I mean, it's very unfortunate that this year we're going with this presentation, or final presentation via Zoom. Usually Stefan was organizing them with, Steven was organizing them in the bakery there. And it's amazing when you go there and even you come for a review of, I'm speaking to the jurors, even if you come for a review for 2 or 3 projects, you see the rest of them. And it's amazing how different they are actually. What this program is giving the opportunity to the students to express themselves. And if you look at the methodology, it all leads to that. So I'm just reminiscent what we are looking this morning. Actually, the previous session is kind of a completely different attitude of some of the projects. So I think, unfortunately, we cannot, I mean, the jurors cannot see this level of different architectural articulations from very distinct young architectural voices. But hopefully you can guys go and browse through the to the Canvas board and see the rest of them if you get a chance. Really some astonishing projects there, including those which we just saw today.
Well, thank you guys for, well, first having me. And I think the work is really fantastic. And Stephen, for your credit, of course, I mean, nothing will be done without the students and the faculty, but I think the way that you have put together this program, I mean, even though it's been taking place already for a while, I think it's such a comprehensive education for the students that also includes the this professional practice that you are offering them, like to intern for different offices, and which is, I think it's fantastic because we also get to know some of you and get to work one-to-one, which is, I mean, it's really productive and interesting. So well, I'm looking forward to the next set of reviews. So hopefully not Zoom.
I hope we're live next
again.
year.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for interning our students for all these years. Very grateful.
Thank you all. Thank you for your feedback. All the reviewers. Super valuable. Super valuable.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice,
Yes, thank you.
restful.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Enjoy the day.